Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next guests are Michael Springate and Taran Kootenaiu from their new film, Bella Ciao. We had a great conversation, three-way conversation, and sadly, once again, still not face-to-face, and it looks like that is going to be the norm for quite some time. Digitally, of course, face-to-face in one way or another. And we talk about this new film, Bella Ciao, and how it is really about, a song of resistance. We talk about reconciliation, we talk about relationships, and we spend a great deal of time chatting about community and reconciliation, at least maybe small r, and how it becomes very particular. We talk about historical injustice and about how reconciliation actually happens through actions, as Taran is quick to remind us, and it's an important reminder that this isn't just about theory, this is about practice. It happens in the room. One of my favorite sort of things that bubbled to the surface as a result of having this conversation. We talk about mediation, and we talk about social solidarity and how to re-knit. What does that even mean? How to re-knit? We talk about memory and trauma and another lovely notion of Michael's dramatic expectations, and how we sometimes have to leave those at the door. They don't always serve us. They don't serve us well. We talk about listening and seeing and talking and understanding, and about how maybe we can actually look after each other. So on that sort of hopeful note, I'm going to say you're going to enjoy the interview, and I really hope and trust you're going to step into the film. Look for it online, and we'll certainly have some links, and if you can't find it, we will be giving you access to that when the time comes. So stay tuned on social media as well. Coming right up, my interview with Michael and Taran about their new film, Bella Ciao. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and my speaking. You can get a copy of Real Change is Incremental there. And of course, face-to-face-live.ca. You're probably listening to this podcast through Spotify or SoundCloud or iTunes or one of the usual suspects. But if you are doing that, please head to the website, face-to-face-live.ca. Find out what else we have there. And also, over 515 interviews published. TIFF is coming up, Toronto International Film Festival, in the very near future. And we're going to be adding to that before the end of the year as well, to the library. So check us out. Sign up for the newsletter. Please share us with family and friends, and socially mediate us. We'd really love it too if you'd leave us a review online at iTunes. That would be huge, or at Google Play, or something along those lines. And only takes a minute or so. I'm actually going to be putting a contest together to try to generate more reviews. It's really it's pretty hard to get people to do that. But please do, if you can. Don't forget too, you can actually advertise with Face to Face through our newsletter, online, on our website. We're getting hundreds of thousands of unique website hits every month. So please take us up on that, and share this with family and friends. And don't forget rabble.ca, news for the rest of us. Face to Face also appears there, with a host of other journalists and podcasters, and conversations are happening there that matter. So check that out. But coming right up, a new and important and a moving, compassionate film, Michael Springate and Taran Kootenaiu talking about a song or songs of resistance, coming right up. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We are joined by two very special guests here with us today, and sadly, we are not actually face to face. We'll just have to go with the digital version. We have Taran Kootenaiu with us and Michael Springate to talk about a new film, to talk about issues around it. And welcome, Taran and Michael. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having us.
So. Yeah, it's and Taran, I think I can hear the ice cubes in your coffee in the background. So this is lovely. So you've settled in. That's wonderful. I'm just there it is, folks. There it is. taste the difference. Yeah, love that. Hey guys, congratulations on the film. I know it's been out for a while, and I know it was airing online, digital platform. Either of you, can you talk a little bit about the reception and stepping into this, and provide a little bit of context before we get into some of the issues around the film and why it's meaningful.
Taryn, do you want to try?
You can go first, Michael.
Okay.
He has coffee to sip on, Michael.
That's true. It was shot in East Vancouver, and all of the actors are from East Vancouver.
Oh, and by the way, folks, the film is Bella Ciao.
Bella Ciao. And Bella Ciao, I think many people recognize, was an Italian resistance song, but it's been picked up by the Latin American community. And it's sung in the film in Spanish, and then again in Italian. And in some ways, the film relates to the history of this neighborhood based on Commercial Drive in East Vancouver, where there are many Latin Americans, and most of whom originally came after the overthrow of Allende in Chile in 1973. In fact, I live in a housing co-op called Paloma Housing Co-op, and it's called Paloma after the dove of peace.
Oh, okay.
And it was founded by Chilean refugees fleeing Chile and landing in Vancouver. And many Italians settled in East Vancouver as workers, but slowly became landowners. And part of the context of the film, in fact, is Latin American refugees in relationship to a landowning class of Italians who, in fact, have also a revolutionary background, but have now become somewhat more well-placed in their society. And there's also an indigenous component, because there's an indigenous component to where I live, highly engaged in the housing movement, but also with a community that comes through from other places, that comes to Vancouver from other places. And in terms of the film, our young man that Taryn plays is looking for his sister. So that's unfortunately not that unusual, that someone will come to Vancouver looking for a member of their family. So that's a larger context, if you will. The origins of the story come from thinking about this community and researching within this community and talking to people from this community, and then finding actors who lived and who are representative of the characters, and slowly building a script through table readings. And then eventually we managed to cobble enough money together to shoot, and there was 3 different production companies coming together to try to make it work. And then with that footage, we eventually cobbled enough money to do the post-production. And then it was first shown at Whistler Film Festival, and then it was shown at Van City, and it had a very wonderful reception, in fact, in Vancouver. And then it went to Winnipeg, and then was meant to go to Toronto, but COVID came in. And so we ended up with a digital platform supported by Real Causes. And the film is ever so slowly kind of building a steady and appreciative audience that wants this kind of work, but it's taken time.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say steady and appreciative. I love the, and I don't know where it is, but I think the quote from, it's on the website. A poem to the notion that art and resistance nourish each other is a quote from Adrian Mack at the Georgia Strait, and I love steady and appreciative. I think is a really lovely way to refer to the response, but I think also to the film itself. It's a real testament to community. And I love, Michael, how you talked about how the script, how the film, how the actors, how the drive and the passion and the commitment to it came out of the community. Because isn't that what this film is really all about?
It is, and it's hard work.
Yes, right.
And people, it's contentious sometimes, how people are portrayed and the relationships they engage in. It can become an issue. But we worked very openly and honestly, and Carolyn Combs is a director, and she works very openly and honestly, and she's relationship oriented. She wants to know what the relationship is, and she wants to know how the relationship evolves. So the story is the evolution of the relationships, and there we are.
It's such a complicated series of relationships. I love how the film ends, and it's sort of it's this delightful solution almost. Solution's probably the wrong word, but resolution is probably not a bad word for this party. And I won't talk too much about it. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about spoilers for folks, but Taran, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that sense of community and family and relationships, because you have a pretty interesting one with a few of the characters in the film. And here you are looking for your sister. And I love that metaphor, I guess, of aren't we all kind of looking for someone or something? I guess trying to find our way back home, I guess, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting how the relationships are built and how they intertwine throughout the narrative. Yeah, it's kind of like an interesting journey that Nikki has to take in terms of trusting people when I'm sure it must be really hard to trust anybody once you have a missing family member. So you're really mostly reliant on trust in people you don't know in order to find the person that you love most. So by being in a community that has relationships or has trust in new people and all that is a really beautiful notion to what Commercial Drive actually is like. For the most part, is really open kind of willingness to hear different people, and it's pretty fascinating the I don't know, I guess mirror reflection that the movie has for what Commercial Drive actually is like throughout my experiences anyway. And I've been in Vancouver for almost 9 years now. And Commercial Drive's always kind of carried this air of that community. And so, yeah, I think Bella Ciao does a really good job with that.
As Taran, you and I were talking before we had hit the record button for today's interview about a piece that you're going to be delivering, hopefully in the not so distant future. I'd love for you to chat a little bit about that. I understand it's a comedy show of spoken word. You're a poet in many different respects, performer, an artist, an actor, all of the above, a writer. But it's a comedy that talks about reconciliation. This film, Bella Ciao, for me, is about so many things, but reconciliation clearly is a theme that runs throughout. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship, reconciliation, community? How do you find it? Where do you even begin?
Yeah, so
it's a big question.
Yeah, but I've done my research.
I bet you have. The play's ready to go, isn't it? White Noise is what it's called, and it's ready to go.
White Noise, yeah, it's ready to go. It was going to world premiere in April at the Fire Hall this year, but COVID happened, so it got postponed for I think the next season. But depending if Vancouverites get their act together, there might not be another season because we might need to lock down again. Hopefully not. But yeah, it was really exciting. I had a workshop production of it at the Anvil Center. Savage Society and the Anvil Center worked together to kind of create what was almost pretty much a production. The Fire Hall basically purchased what was already there and brought it to the Fire Hall, and we'll obviously make it better with a little bit more money and stuff. But it was really cool to kind of actually see what it looks like in actuality, kind of birthed to life. The actors weren't off book, but they had scripts in hand. But we had a week basically to rehearse and work with each other, and it's a very strong cast of people. And because in terms of the reconciliation portion, when I was writing it, I was very specific about making sure that the cast was half Indigenous and half white. so that even in the rehearsal room, if the conversations haven't been had with each other before, that trying to make the comedy work and the like relationships mend meant that the reconciliation, as you'd like to call it, happens actually in the room, so that when they're ready to present it and present it to an audience, that at least that work has already been kind of a little bit forced on them already, so that they're able to navigate the comedy uh, with each other so the audience can experience it fully and nothing like kind of held back. So it was kind of a social experiment to see like how that would really turn out, because you can't really make a joke about like racism if you haven't like already checked yourself about like where you stand on it.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of like a big mirror of a play to just put into audiences' hands. Like, where are you on the like spectrum of racism, and like how do you see?
Well, Darren, I love the phrase "the reconciliation happens in the room." Michael, I hope the writer in you would agree with me on this. I mean, isn't that a beautiful phrase? I mean, and I think, for your comment, Michael, about community and where this film came from and the story and so on, does reconciliation happen in the room, in relationship, face to face, in conversation, when people are genuinely asking, I guess, the right, and substantive kind of right questions, but also listening, really listening if they're in the room. And that's for both of you, by the way.
I'm going to come at this a little bit sideways, actually.
Yeah, go.
So Taron plays Nicky, and Taron is a writer, and he's just talking about White Noise, the piece that he's just finished developing, really. Marie Clements plays Hester, and Marie Clements is an extremely accomplished and strong writer. Carmen.
Do you want to do a quick shout out for the podcast that I just posted with Marie, Red Snow, folks? Check it out. Marie was delightful. She makes an appearance in this film. Sorry, Michael, I couldn't help myself.
Do it, absolutely do it.
Yeah, I mean, face to face interview with Majda and Marie about Red Snow. Stunning, beautiful film. Needs to be seen. A lot of similarities, actually.
Well, we come from the same time in the same place. I mean, in a certain respect, and not so in another respect. But Marie Clements is in the film. Carmen Aguirre plays Constanza, which is the lead, and she's the star in the film, if we're allowed saying that. And Carmen is an extremely strong and accomplished writer and playwright. And Tony Nardi plays the male lead, Arnaldo, and he's also a writer. So it was odd in some ways. We go to the table to read the script, and we have very strong writers.
Sure. Lots of opinions.
Lots of opinions, and lots of consideration. And where you end up when we talk about reconciliation in the room, it's actually mediated by a discussion of the objectives of the characters. What are these characters actually trying to do? So rather than us coming to conclusions about the nature of the world, what we actually do is get closer and closer to the characters that we're performing or that we are writing. And we take a look at their objectives, we take a look at their motivations. And there's a lot of good motivations. We are not a bunch of psychopaths in East Vancouver. There's a lot of people who are working very hard to understand each other and to make it a better world.
Hey, Michael, you know that people look for sound bites in interviews. That might be one of the favorite sound bites for this interview.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy if it is, and people have experience in this. Like one of the interesting things in the film is when Constanza's daughter actually gives $20 to Nicky, and people think, oh, that's impossible. But actually, no, it's not impossible. These kind of things happen. With certain people who have been socialized and understand the world a certain way. They happen. Right. And it affects Nicky, the character, and he ends up using the money not to buy food, and he is hungry. He buys an oxygen canister, which ends up back in the hands of Constanza, who needs it. So what I'm trying to say here is that the reconciliation becomes particular. It's not about universal statements of right and wrong. We're not capable of reconciling all of the historical injustices, What we
Right.
can do is take a look at how characters relate today and the motivations that they have in that moment. And if we can get that right and show how they link to other characters and other motivations, we're ending up with a worthwhile portrait.
No, it's good. I love the notion of a worthwhile portrait. Taryn, as an artist and as a writer, does that compute for you in the real world as well? So you've got your audience, they're laughing at the jokes, they're in the room, as you say. Are they, leaving the theater, watching Bella Ciao online, from a museum, a great piece, thinking about, talking about these issues? Does that make sense?
A little bit. I will say, very well said, Michael. Poetic in the way you
Sorry?
described that all. I will say that what Michael said was very poetic. Just praising Michael. But I have a interesting relationship with the word reconciliation as an Indigenous person.
Okay.
And it's just so like, I hope that when people leave then we're reverting back to white noise, I guess, because the work that I've done with this is when they leave the room, when they go home, that they're thinking about, I guess I can link it to what Michael was saying about like objective based things, is like people experience what reconciliation is through their actions, not their words. And what Canada has done in terms of reconciliation has been words, not action. So it kind of, isn't a very reasonable thing to say that Canada is reconciling with Indigenous peoples when they're really not. So it does come down to what is like your motive, what is like your actions, what is your agenda behind trying to rebuild a relationship. And some would argue build a relationship in the first place. Reconcile would mean that there was like something there before. Canada has always been pretty terrible to Indigenous peoples from the get-go. So yeah, that's kind of.
So it can't just be theoretical. This has got to make contact with reality in meaningful ways. What would be a meaningful action for you from an Indigenous perspective? Is listening the first place to start, and like really engaged listening?
There's listening, yeah. There's a lot of unlearning. I think what it always comes down to is decentering yourself to be a part of a bigger whole is a big problem that I think a lot of Canadians face. And it's not their fault, of course. We're all kind of born into a system that I think provides this idea of what should be in the center and what should not be. And it's just like our jobs to keep remembering like what's important and how to stick together. I think a lot like what Bella Ciao does is that reminder of community.
Right.
And
sure.
Yeah.
Michael, isn't Bella Ciao, isn't this a film about memory? Isn't this about, in order to deal with that, sense of displacement and the dysfunction, I guess you could say, societal dysfunction. I mean, isn't it almost the opening line of the film? The scars are not the problem.
Yeah, almost the opening line of the film is the scars are not the problem, because often. What am I trying to say here? I'd like to say this. I appreciate very much what Darren has just said, and the film, in some ways, tries to show erosion of social solidarity, as well as a reknitting of social solidarity. And the erosion takes place quite naturally, in a sense, and the reknitting takes place quite naturally as well. When we talk about memory, the relationship between memory and trauma. I have a thing against films that are structured only as choreography of strong emotions. Um, when it came to creating the memory of Constanza, in terms of her mother is missing in Chile, there's a relationship between the missing in Chile and the missing in Canada, the murdered and missing Indigenous woman. these are all political acts. These are the result of political acts. These are the result of historical consciousness that's not being confronted. How do we do this without just exploiting the situation to sell a cinema ticket? You know, I find it appalling. I see so much work that is supposedly about these communities that is just really exploitive. And it's all geared and designed in terms of a choreography of so-called strong emotions, but leaves me cold. So we're trying to be somewhat more legitimate, for lack of better words. People relate on a daily basis. The person beside you might, in fact, if you are part of the Latin American community, might have been tortured in Guatemala. He might have been kicked out of Nicaragua. Because this is the community that came up to Canada. The community that came up to Canada from Latin America was not a wealthy community. They were refugees, political refugees in the full sense of the word, who had missing relatives. So how does one actually deal with this? Well, in Bella Ciao, my intent was to underwrite those elements. And when so that we begin to see that everybody around us has a certain amount of trauma, some more, some less, but they don't come at you with the trauma first thing. You actually have to listen, you have to see, you have to talk, you have to understand. And the person who you think is the can man or a non-productive member of society might in fact have his own objectives to have a carbon neutral footprint, which he thinks as a politically correct action, as a necessary correct action. So all that to say that when it came to the history of Chile, we used segments of Patricio Guzman's film, and we asked him for the rights. And much to our surprise, he gave us the rights to the Battle of Chile, which is a recognized masterpiece, as well as the Pearl Button. And we cut those from that film to create a certain emotional context for Carmen Aguirre's portrayal of Constanza. This is a long way of trying to say that current dramatic expectations and structures don't serve us. They really don't. They might massage our emotions for a minute or two. They might make us feel good about ourselves in terms of some act of heroism that we see, but they're not actually allowing us to see what our lives are really like. So in Bella Ciao, we try to underwrite certain dramatic moments. There's a couple of deaths in the film, actually, but they don't feel like that. They're underwritten so that we actually get a sense of what life is more or less more likely to be. I'm sorry for ranting and raving, but I feel strongly.
No, that's good. So I'd love for you both to speak into that. You're both writers. You're both performers of a particular sort. The dramatic expectations. So not what you would normally see. Not that beginning, middle, and end. But I mean, life doesn't happen that way, right? I mean, it's paradox. It's contradiction, right? It's complexity.
Exactly.
Is that kind of what you're saying, Michael?
Exactly so.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly so. And the resolution is, in fact, what motivations are you yourself bringing to your life in this moment, not theoretically.
Right. I love. Well, I guess someone of Costanza's worldview. She was a radical. It's spoken about. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? I would love to hear your thinking from a script writing perspective, Taran from a performance perspective, as a spoken word artist, as an artist, period, as an Indigenous person. What does it mean, especially in this day and age, with all that's going on right now? This place we find ourselves in, is that an important thing? Take capital R radical. Is it time to step in?
I mean, like, I think so. But there's a lot of ways you can go about like being radical, right? Like I've heard terms of like radical kindness or like radical loving, to try and not villainize the word radical.
Right.
But also like it is important to step into what is necessary, what's being called upon you. Like I think in the art and resistance nourish each other. That the quote, I think that is a very radical idea as well, because it's so important for us to like continue to voice and try to, you know, uh, peel away the layers of the
Right.
truth, or like the lies, in order to find the truth and what we're all living in order to, I don't know, continue building together. If that makes sense. It's a little bigger of a metaphor, but
No, it's great. It's great. I think it makes perfect sense. And I think it speaks to that dramatic expectations kind of in a way that you were talking about, Michael. And this is part of the reason why just if I can connect it to the podcast and what I've been trying to do over the last 5 or 6 years with my conversations is, when people say to me, hey, would you mind sending me the 10 or the 12 questions you're going to ask? I really push back against that, because I think that the discovery and real moments of intimacy and creativity come out of that paradox and that sense. Sometimes there's silence, right? And if you let the silence sit, it can lead to some really great revelations. I don't know if that makes sense to you as a writer, Michael, or not.
Oh, look, it makes perfect sense. It's very difficult not to let one's dramatic expectations or narrative forms get in the way of an
Right.
appreciation of a work. I often find if I'm reading a novel, I stop at a certain point in time, and I stop and I realize, oh my God, I came in with absolutely the wrong expectations to this reading. I have to go back. So I start from the beginning again, and I let a lot of my expectations go and try to find out what was really there. And like a number of people have said to me with Bella Ciao, they said, I really appreciated the second viewing. The first viewing, they're waiting for the dramatic action to be clear, so they can set up their expectations for watching the film. Well, it's more
Right.
intricate than that, and it is there, but you may not catch it right away. And so, in the second time around, they've given up certain expectations, and then they begin to see the structure that's actually there, and they begin to engage with it and appreciate it. Getting rid of look, anybody who works in playwriting, script writing, novel writing knows that at a certain point in time, you're going to meet this bureaucracy that tells you that this is what the structure and your intent should be. These are what the questions should be. Like in your case, these are what the only questions we're going to tolerate are the following questions because that's what good work is. Well, in fact, that's not true. Good work is when you discover and define the structure necessary for the research that you're doing. And we're research based. So the research will determine the structure of the end result. The end result is going to be a trace of the work you did. It's not built on expectation from the word go. I'm adamant about that because it takes time to get there, and it's good to be there, and it's good to talk about it.
It is good to talk about it. I'm always sad when these conversations come to an end, and I feel like most of the time we're just getting started, and often we'll say, "Hey, are you going to join me for a part two down the road?" Because we barely scratched the surface, and I think that's a sign of a great film. I'm thrilled to hear people are going back to Bella Ciao a second time because I think it's very layered and nuanced and intimate in a variety of ways. Taran, I think you get one of my favorite lines in the film, and help me out if I get it right here or not. But hanging upside down for a day is a long time. Was that the line?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And help me out here, but there's a piece of installation art. It's got a wheelchair that's very important. It becomes an integral part of the story in a variety, in a very layered kind of way. And it seems like a real act of violence that this thing gets stolen, but ultimately leads to, I don't know, can I say that it leads to a form of reconciliation or a deeper sense of intimacy in relationship?
A little bit, I guess.
A little bit,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
Little,
it is this driving force of
right,
what turns into be kindness begets kindness,
right.
which I
Yes,
guess
yes.
reconciliation could be that.
Yeah, I found when like my first reaction to that, Michael, maybe this makes you smile, not sure, raises your eyebrows, but who steals a wheelchair? But you know,
But
but when it's worth money to recycle it, right, or to sell it to somebody else, and we're talking about vulnerability and staying alive, well, maybe I will steal a wheelchair.
oh no,
You know,
definitely, believe me, wheelchairs are expensive items. They get stolen all the time.
yeah,
I
but I love how it becomes a piece of art in this film,
well, this we had to
and
represent.
tries, and the whole idea is empathy, and I don't know. Anyway, I love that. It's
But the
beautiful.
artist class. So look, we have to represent the artist class as well, right? Even though we are
Right,
artists,
right,
many artists have in fact tied themselves up in their own symbols, which have
right,
become symbols,
right.
ultimately become symbols of despair, and they tie themselves into their own symbols of despair, and and that's what happens with this sculptor. He ties himself into his own symbol of despair, and he hopes to get Taryn to effectively join him. And
That's
Taryn,
right.
and Taryn says, "Well," he looks at it and says, "Well, maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe not.
Nice try.
Nice
Yeah.
try." But he's going to step out of it. So, and the artist, of course, is trying to sell his work. I mean, and there's one. This is an anti-capitalist film as well. There's one moment where the
Nice.
person's walking along and the graffiti on the wall is "Capitalism is a plague," and in our time now, it's an interesting graffiti. Let's just say that capitalism is a plague, but it's a genuine appreciation of what people think, and
Mm,
it's also a genuine, if somewhat funny, representation of how so much contemporary art has tied itself in symbols of despair. And
right.
it's necessary to break through from that, and thank God many people do.
Sadly, we are coming to the end of the interview, but I did want to talk about one line in particular that Marie Clements has, and I'd love to hear you both speak into this in some way, shape, or form. But I think she's, I'm not exactly, I can't remember exactly who, as Soledad maybe she's responding to, but she says something to the effect of, "We'll look after each other." Michael, Taryn, is do you guys believe that in this kind of crazy, uncertain time that we find ourselves in? Are we moving in the right direction? And your comment, Michael, about despair, is this ultimately a hopeful film and a hopeful story? And are we moving in the right direction?
I'll go first, Taryn, and you can summarize. Hester says that very specifically to Constanza. Marie Clement says it very specifically to Carmen Aguirre. We'll take care of each other. They've built that relationship over a period of time. Both of these women went to prison together, and they sang in the prisons together. They have a relationship that's built on past actions. So it wasn't meant to be a general universal principle. It was meant to be, I look at you, you look at me, and we have a very specific shared history, and we will take care of each other, and they will. Those two absolutely will. They have loyalty to each other. They have history together. They understand the struggle. They're in it for the long haul. They know what
Right.
they know what
That's
they're
good.
speaking about.
Yeah, I do believe that that is what the world is coming to, and it began that way, and will probably always try to continue to be that way. Is looking after each other. I know that a lot of the frontline works in terms of being on the streets. That's a very common understanding or phrase is we take care of each other, we look out for one another, we help each other, especially in the face of like police brutality and not having much trust from the state. It does come down to everyone having to actually take care of each other, whether it's like sending funds for people's tuition, sending funds for people's bailout. It's not coming from these millionaires, it's coming from like the people. So I do think that when push comes to shove, it will be people looking after each other.
Hmm. Listen, I've got so many more questions, and this is for me, this is the kind of conversation that could go on for quite a long time. But Michael, and odd to end kind of an interview this way, I suppose. But what is this film about for you? Now having seen it, I would think many, many times, rewrites, table reads, as you say, input, reviews, conversations, Q&As. For me, it's history, it's memory, it's about Chile, it's about an anti-capitalist film, it's a protest film. I can say all that, but I'd love to hear from you. Are you? Have you had to set aside some of your dramatic expectations in with respect to Bella Ciao?
I've had to realize that it's an assumption, the wrong assumption, that the audiences will necessarily set aside their expectations.
Right. Right.
You have to.
You're sounding a lot like a philosopher to me, Michael. It's great. I love it.
You have to find, but eventually the film will find some of its own audience.
Yes.
And it's possible, and I've seen that happen. What you're asking actually is very difficult because it's a difficult process. The film, you just have to come at it 100% and just keep giving and know that you will make mistakes, and mistakes are made, and not everything is perfect, and you still have to come back and keep at it. Why? Because you grow.
Right.
Because you grow. Your ideas are tested. The research questions oneself, and a life that is not investigated is not worth living. That kind of idea.
Right. So you are a philosopher.
So there we are. If you understand me now, I know Taryn a little bit better, and it's a privilege. It's a privilege to know Taryn. I'm not just being sucky. It's a privilege to know Taryn. It's a privilege to work with Carmen. It's a privilege to work with Marie Clements. It's a privilege to work with Carolyn Combs. Your life is much, much stronger. It's much more genuine and interesting. It's much more hopeful. So, yes, if you do the work, you are rewarded by a sense of richness in life and hopefulness for the future, but also a sense of the endurance that's necessary.
Right. And the yeah, well, to me, what I heard there was community, and there's power in relationship, and power is the wrong word. There's healing in relationship, there's hope in relationship. Taryn, what's your hope for just as we wrap up? What's next? I know White Noise. Any sense I know you briefly mentioned it. Are you hopeful it's going to happen this year, or is it more all going to be, as you said, is it all dependent on your fellow Vancouverites?
Yeah, I guess it kind of is. I don't know. It's pretty interesting, because it's I don't know. I think it's a timely piece, in terms of just trying to do work to talk about racism, to disseminate it, so that we can then group back together to work on things that are more important, like the land or taking care of each other. Racism seems to be something that is such a division, and so I was thinking that this piece would be great right now, because I could at least start a conversation about where we could start rebuilding, maybe start talking about the traumas. And so I find it funny that it got postponed, and it seems that racism is constantly just ramping up. It's the universe is no, we're just gonna let the world live it, actually, instead of through a play. And so I don't know. I'm interested to see how it'll land when it comes back. If people are ready for it, if they don't, I know people aren't always going to be quite ready for it. If it's inside, I know it's inside of all of us. I kind of come at it that I was born into a world where racism was put onto me, so I absorbed it, and it's I still carry it in different forms, and it's my job to continuously unpack that, let it go, but move through it. Right. And so I think I'm just curious to see how it'll all play out when it does.
Well, It's good, and I think the notion of unpacking is so great, and it's what plays like White Noise and films like Bella Ciao to me are all about. And I love the insights here today from both of you, and for your time and your generosity. Thank you for the film, and congratulations. It's a powerful, moving piece, and I hope everyone gets to see it, and I hope everyone sees it twice. Actually, Michael, how's that?
That's wonderful.
That's even better. Yeah.
And
Yeah, we've been talking with Taryn Kootenaiu and Michael Springate here today on Face to Face. Thanks for your time, guys. Thank you.
I thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, and it's an honor to have been a part of Bella Ciao.
Thank you.